What's up everyone, my name is Rosendo, welcome back to my channel. We are back with another video, and we are finally back with our track review series, this time taking a look at All the Time by John Summit, a new John Summit release with the Chainsmokers. Actually the first time we're taking a look at a track by an artist we already looked at. For those of you who didn't see the Let's Go Out episode, we looked at Let's Go Out by John Summit, which is actually the highest rated track we've reviewed up to this point. I basically gave it a 7, and it's the only 7 that we've had in the series up to this point, and we're finally taking a look at another track by John Summit, this time for episode number, what is this, episode number 12? I'll correct it if I'm wrong. Taking a look at All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, Ilsey. Make sure to like and subscribe, but without further ado, let's hop into Spotify. Alright, we are back in Spotify taking a look at All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, and Ilsey. Now, like I said, this is the first time we reviewed a track by another artist. I didn't choose this track because I wanted to review another John Summit track or because I really liked Let's Go Out because of the first 7. I chose this track because I found it to be an interesting collaboration. John Summit and the Chainsmokers isn't something I expected to see, and I actually really liked the Chainsmokers. I do think they're, in the grand scheme of things, I think they're slightly underrated. It's easy to gloss over them because even though they have a few of the tracks that are some of the highest streamed in the world, deep in the scene, they kind of get overshadowed. We kind of forget about them a little bit, but they have some really, really good tracks. I really wanted to take a look at this collab by John Summit and the Chainsmokers, which brings us to the preface, which is what main topics are we going to discuss today? What is the main theme or concept of this video? Which there really isn't any. I thought there would be more because you might think we would take an approach of, okay, let's see what it's like when we compare an artist's first track to a second track, but I don't quite think we're there yet. I mean, we already talked about comparing artists to their previous discography. I think in the Dimension video, Last Heroes, Midas, Nurko, a few other ones. So that's not something we're talking about today. We're not going to be talking about comparing this track to Let's Go Out. We're just going to be talking about this track. So there's no real preface. There's nothing really I want to highlight or a concept I want to introduce today. The one thing I will draw attention to when we get into the listening section is going to be, as far as a specific track goes, are things like progression, storytelling, direction, narratives, plots. The plot is kind of a word I'm going to use a little bit today, but we can actually listen to this track because as we listen to it, I'm going to be drawing attention to all those things. That's going to be my focus. I'm not going to be talking about the lyrics or the instruments or the beat or anything. We're going to be talking about all those things I mentioned earlier. So why don't we actually get to listening to the track? As a reminder, there will be no audio playing for copyright reasons, but we can all listen to the track at the same time with All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, and Ilsey in 3, 2, 1. All right, now the first thing you kind of see is that this track is 3 minutes long. You start to wonder if it's going to be on the shorter side. You get a build-up. The hook of the vocals is there. We're 2 phrases in. It feels like a 4-bar pacing. Not 2 phrases, but it feels like a 4-bar pacing of the track. Ready, and we're in. So right off the bat, you gotta kind of get like the first drop. The framing of this is going to be important later, but we're just listening to the track. You get the vocals over a beat, over like a house beat. And this is kind of what you're listening to right now. Pretty standard stuff so far. Not the most interesting drop, but yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Not the most interesting drop. Pay close attention. Because after that, we kind of bring it down. I'll compare it to Let's Go Out after, but we bring the track down and you kind of get a verse here. The effect that has is it frames what you heard before as kind of like an intro, and this feels like your verse. You get your vocals, it's a little bit stripped, definitely because you came down and it's stripped. This feels more like a verse, which makes the beginning feel more like an intro instead of like a drop. So the pacing and the kind of the experience is already a little bit skewed. Vocals repeat, you get a build up, you're kind of liking it. You feel it start picking up. You hear kind of those synths and that bass in the background. Vocals are definitely faster here. You get a build up with those stabs. Dance floor sound into a drum and bass drop. We're going to talk all about this later. I do like it. I'm a big fan of dance floor drum and bass. You kind of strip it again. It builds up again. More stabs. Into another unique drop. On the surface, it seems pretty similar to Let's Go Out. and more drum and bass rhythms. And it ends just like that without an outro. And that is All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, and Ilsey. All right, and there you go. So what is my review of this track? This is a little bit interesting because, as I said, on the surface, it feels very similar to Lights Go Out. Lights Go Out kind of had the vocals at the start. You get a drop right away, and you get, let's call it like you get like 2.5 distinct areas. You have the main drop, you have the hip-hop-ish type drop, and then you have like the synthy, kind of a ragey area, and then you go back to a house drop at the end. Here it kind of feels similar, where you have a first house drop, you have a drum and bass drop, and then you kind of strip it and you kind of give it a unique third drop, but it's still a drum and bass drop at the end of the day. So on the surface, it feels very similar to Lights Go Out. But why did I give Lights Go Out a 7? And why am I, at the end of the day, going to give this track a lower rating? I'll get into the rating I give in a second because it's a little bit strange, the rating I'm going to give it. But I don't really think this lives up to Lights Go Out. And I know I said I wouldn't compare the two, but the point I'm trying to make today, and the argument and the thing I want to discuss today is, okay, these two tracks are very similar on the surface. How are they different? What makes the experience of one different? Why is one, a track that I think is really, really well made versus this track, which I think is a little bit more average? Now, one of the biggest things I do want to call attention to is, as I mentioned as we were listening to the track, is the effect of bringing the track down and adding different lyrics in what I'm calling the verse. Because when you're listening to the track, it feels like a very similar start. It feels like you kind of have the vocals come in, you start with the drop, but I talk about all these things about intention and storytelling and experiences and pacing and all these things like that, because all of these things are things that have effect on the track and the experience and kind of what happens when you listen to it. Because as I mentioned, when you have the intro starting that way, even though it kind of feels like a track that goes kind of straight into the drop, when you bring the track down, when you strip it, even in the Lights Go Out, you kind of strip it, but it goes straight into the vocals, right? The drop ends and then the vocals just kind of fill up the space. Here, the track very kind of almost tangibly comes down, and then you introduce new lyrics that really develop the vocals, that really make it feel like that is a verse. And as a result, because all the things that I mentioned, it feels like everything before that is an intro. That kind of messes up the pacing of the track. I mean, you're a minute into a 3-minute track and it feels like all you had was the intro and the track is only just getting started. And what happens after that is you had an intro, you had the verse, and then you go into a drum and bass drop, and now all of a sudden it feels like the track is kind of lacking, what the word I'm going to use is a plot. It's very, it's very simple in movies. We think about, the plots of things, but no one really thinks about the stories and the plots of tracks. But I always urge people to, because I think these things are artistic things. So when you have an intro that sounds one way, you go into the verse, and then the first drop is a kind of completely different thing, a completely different sound. Not only is it a different sound, but you felt that the track speeds up to get there, and it kind of changes the direction entirely. It's like the track is missing a plot, not necessarily narrative. I like to say the word narratives for like stories and melodies and things like that. Here we're talking about the overall track experience, which it feels like it's missing, a plot. You start with an intro, and the effect is that the track starts with an intro, you bring it down, and then you just kind of jump somewhere else completely. Where in Lights Go Out, it doesn't feel like an intro. It feels like you have the first drop. It establishes that, and you end up revisiting it at the end. But with the implementation of the vocals and kind of having certain areas that don't really move up and down, but you just kind of feel like you're going from area to area in blocks, it adds a little bit more creativity. It kind of flows nicer. Here, because it moves in a certain direction, it almost feels like it's moving, but it's nowhere fixed. It doesn't really have a plot or a fixed sense of kind of experience here. And that's my biggest gripe with this track. At the end of the day, a lot of it are things that are ineffable. They're things that exist in my head that I really can't explain or put into words, but it's about how we perceive these experiences, and a lot of it is subconscious. But the best way I can put it is, again, when you move in these directions, it feels like the track is lacking structure and a plot, and it just feels like it does different things. You go into that drum and bass drop, and then you kind of strip it again to go into like a slightly more unique third drop, which ends up also being like a drum and bass drop. So this track kind of feels like it's all over the place. I do think it's kind of hurt by the fact that Lights Go Out already exists and it kind of did all these things. And the fact that Lights Go Out did it really, really well. And then you have this track that kind of feels like it's lost in a sense of direction. It does hurt it more. But again, it's all about things I mentioned in the past about how we need to compare art forms to different reference frames. When you take this track that kind of feels like it's missing a plot, that's lost in direction, and you compare it to any other track, Lights Go Out or not Lights Go Out, it just feels like this track is missing something, even though it does cool things in it. And that's the best way I can put it. When it comes to things like storytelling and progression, depending on how the track is moving, the track can do cool things and unique things and, creative things, but it's about how they work together. It's about how they deliver experience. It's about how the story is told, the narratives you're telling, the plot you're developing, the experience of the track, the whole story and the whole piece of art, the whole work together, that even though the track does unique things, the way it's told, the way it progresses, it feels like the result is it's a track that feels like it lacks a plot and it lacks a direction. And I don't mean direction in the movement sense. I mean direction like in a purpose sense. It feels like it lacks a plot or a purpose. So there you go. That's All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, and Ilsey. So after all of that, what is my final rating of this track? I actually I'm not going to lie, I've completely forgot to think about that. I didn't realize that I forgot to give this track a rating before I pressed record until I was listening and I realized, wait a second, I forgot I need to give it a rating. So I need to make up my mind on it right now, and I think I made up my mind on the track rating. It's actually really interesting now that I think about it, because the number I'm going to give this track is actually is the exact same number I gave another track that, now that I think about it, kind of shares a similar effect with this one. I think that after all of that, I'm going to give this track a 5.5. If you saw episode number 3, we gave Guardian Angel by Dimension a 5.5, and I mentioned that I wasn't opposed to half ratings. That's probably the kind of the precision I'll end up at. I won't go quarters, but I think I'll stick with halves. I do think this is a 5.5. Part of me wants to give this track a 5. Part of me wants to give this track a 6. You meet in the middle and you kind of accept where, it's highs and lows. The biggest thing is this. You guys saw me shaking my head and kind of enjoying the beat and the rhythms as I listened to it. This track is creative. I said that, in the review 60 seconds ago. This track is creative, and it does, it provides cool sounds, unique rhythms, and a really creative approach to, hey, house beat with these vocals, you develop a verse, drum and go up, speed it up, drum and bass. It's unique, it's creative. That much is true. But again, just because something is unique, just because something is creative, doesn't mean it's all of a sudden up there. I like to compare, music to movies all the time. If directors are really creative and there's really creative elements to a movie or a TV show that does things that, other TV shows or movies don't do. But at the end of the day, the experience and the plot and the story just kind of isn't all that well developed. You can only give it so much credit to its creativity. You can give it credit for its creativity, but you can't say because of that creativity, it makes up for all the other things that it's lacking. And, even though it's lacking certain things, it's creative. So, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. I think I look at this track the same way. This track has creative elements. I kind of like some of the sound. I'm shaking my head and bobbing my head to the drum and bass, to the dance floor drum and bass areas. I love dance floor drum and bass. It's well done, well produced, well mixed. But, it has its pitfalls. It has things that I think it could do better. So I do think at the end of the day, a 5 out of 5 is a fair rating. 5 would put it at average, but, this track is creative. I think 5 is fair in the sense that it doesn't have, too much of a plot. It doesn't have too much direction, and it just kind of feels like an average track. I think a 6 gives it credit for its creativity, gives it credit that, hey, you know what? I'm bobbing my head. I'm enjoying it. It has some cool sounds. It has these things going for it. But, I think you just meet in the middle. I think I'm honestly more inclined to give this a 5 because I do think this is a slightly more average track, but it's creative. It's unique. It has things going for it. And at the end of the day, I'm not opposed to half ratings. So I think 5 out of 5 is very, very fair for this track, which again is a jump from the 7 that we gave Lights Go Out. I talked about my reasons why I gave it a 7 in Lights Go Out. I talked about my reasons why I gave it a 5 out of 5 in this video. A lot of it can't be explained. A lot of it just exists in my head, and that's just something that we all have to accept. But hopefully I did my best. You guys can let me know what you guys think, if what I said makes sense, and if you agree or disagree with these ratings. So there you go. All the Time by John Summit, the Chainsmokers, and Ilsey, 5.5 out of 10. All right, and there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Like I said, I mentioned a lot of things. I like to compare music to movies, just for reference, right? I think they exist in a similar realm. Storytelling, progression, pacing, development, all these things. So they're I like these things because it's easy for people to understand. You know, people usually take these things into consideration with movies, but they don't usually take them into consideration with music, which I urge people to do. So I'm using these analogies, I'm using these terms, and if they make sense, you guys can let me know. If they don't make sense, you guys can develop on them or ask questions in the comments. You guys can let me know what you think about this track, what you think about Let's Go Out, what you think they do differently, if you like things about this track, if you dislike things about this track, or any other thoughts you guys may have about any of the terms and things I discuss in not only this video, but in all my track reviews down below. I think this would be a great video for us to discuss those things, you know, like plot, direction, narratives, experience, track listening experience, and all that stuff. So remember, I want this channel to be a place of discussion, so make sure to leave all your thoughts down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.